Hi, everyone. Welcome to the information session for the Dayton Renewal Arts Grants for Individuals. I'm going to give it just a few moments here while everybody's getting settled in and getting into Zoom, and I will start this presentation shortly. Looks like we still have some folks jumping into this information session, so I'm going to give it just a few more moments. Again, I am Hannah, the Grant Making Associate here at CultureWorks, and if you're in the right place, you are in the Dayton Region Arts Renewal Grant Information Session for individual artists. All right, it looks like we're settling in. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm so grateful that you're here with us on this Thursday afternoon. Again, I'm Hannah. I'm the Grant Making Associate here at CultureWorks, and I'll be leading you through this information session. And I am joined today by the Director of Grant Making, Karen Maynard. She'll jump in a little bit later during the presentation to walk you through a few specific things. This information session today is for individual artists. This grant opportunity is going to be extended to individual artists as well as organizations. So if you are here today on behalf of an organization, you're more than welcome to stay and listen to the presentation, but know that the application and selection process for organizations as opposed to individuals is just ever so slightly different. That information session for organizations took place on Tuesday, and we'll have that recording up on our website soon. So I would invite you to take a look at that and just make sure you're aware that there are a few slight differences between the applications and, again, the scoring process. This will be recorded, like I mentioned, and it'll be put up on our website so that you are able to view it anytime if you wanted to go back and hear some of the things we're talking about today. We will also have a number of documents available on our website for you to look through eligibility and timeline and things like that, all of which we'll kind of chat through today. I will also open up the floor at the end of this presentation for some questions, so feel free to drop anything you might want to know more about or that we didn't cover in the Q&A box up there. It's the two bubbles near the top or in the chat section as well. And know that we're not ignoring you if you pop anything in there. We're just going to save it until the end today. All right. So with all that aside, I'll go ahead and jump right in. So this is a brand new grant opportunity that we are offering. The Dayton Region Arts Renewal Grant Program is intended to support jobs in the arts sector, keep the doors open to arts organizations in our community, and assist the field in its response to and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. This is an opportunity made possible from a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, which grants to nonprofit organizations, creative writers and translators, state arts agencies, and regional arts organizations in support of art projects across the country. So CultureWorks was just one of many, many organizations who received this wonderful grant from the NEA. And all these organizations kind of built out different programs. So this is the grant program that we'll be awarding, and we're going to tell you all about it. If you want to learn more about the amazing work that the NEA does, you can visit www.arts.gov. They're truly amazing. And if you're here with us for the first time with CultureWorks today and you're not really sure who we are or what we do, CultureWorks is the arts funding, advocacy, and service organization for the 8-county Dayton region. And we're so excited. However you found us, we're excited that you're here with us today, whether you're a newcomer or have a long-standing tradition of joining us on these grant-making journeys. So I'll just go ahead and jump in a little bit about this program specifically that we're going to be offering. Again, we'll be funding to organizations, but you're not here for that. You're an individual artist. So we have $100,000 set aside total that we will be granting to individual artists. Each artist can request up to a maximum of $5,000. So what does it mean to be an individual artist? Oh, I'm glad you asked. I'm going to go over a few highlights for eligibility. This is by no means all-inclusive. So again, I will several times throughout this presentation point you back to visit our website to make sure that you're reading through all the eligibility requirements. But the main ones I wanted to touch on today are that you must be a Dayton Region resident. What does that mean? It means that you must live within a 30-mile radius of the CultureWorks offices, which is on 31 South Main Street. You must be a professional artist. This means that you must have training, be it academic or otherwise, it could be self-taught. And you must have at least a 1-year history of public programming that you're able to show us. You have to be at least 18 years old, and you cannot be a student. We are not funding to students at this time. I see we've got some questions in here, and again, I will pop right into those near the end of this presentation. Before I get to all the great things that you can do with this grant funding, I just want to come right out and go over a few ineligible activities. This is from a list from the National Endowment for the Arts. And some of these things I do know that individual artists can receive grants for this in other fields. So I just want to make sure that we're touching on it here today. We are not funding the following things. Artist relief. So you can't use any of this funding to go toward rent or food assistance. You can't use this for anything that's going to make a profit, a commercial enterprise or activity. You cannot use this grant funding to travel. You cannot use this grant funding for honorifics, fellowships, or one-time monetary recognitions awards. So we are a grantee from the National Endowment for the Arts. We are sub-awarding to you. So no sub awards, please, to anyone else. Social activities such as receptions, parties, or galas. I just wanted to touch on this specifically because this does not mean that you're not able to do a presentation or performance, but we do want to steer clear of things like parties or galas. And last but not least, sub-awards, again, to replace projects that have already passed or any vehicle purchases. So we're not funding those. But the good news is we are funding some great things. So what are we funding? We are funding you to do a project. So what does that mean? Anything that engages the community or re-engages an artist with their work. Again, this is really meant to get folks back on their feet when work was paused or canceled during the pandemic. All of these activities have to take place between October 1st of this year, 2022, and September 30th, 2023. So it will be a year-long grant cycle, and all of your activities have to fall in that time period. Examples of things that you might do with this grant: a performance or a presentation of some kind, an exhibition of visual art or something like that, any training or professional development that you want to participate in, so a workshop or a class or a training, We also recognize that some of you have amazing ideas that maybe aren't ready to be shared with the community yet, but require a lot of planning and a lot of research. So this grant can also go towards that more introspective kind of solo focused work that will eventually be shared with the community, but maybe it's not quite there yet. And then the creation of an artwork. These are all things that are able to be funded. Moving right along, I'll go into some specific dates that you want to be mindful of as we move forward in the grant process. We are going to open applications next Friday on July 1st, 2022. All grant applications will have to be submitted through our CultureWorks platform, which is Community Force, and we'll walk you through what that looks like and how to access it a little bit later in this presentation. The application will be open for a little bit over a month, with applications closing on August 5th at 4 p.m. So you'll have about a month to apply and get all of your things ready. After that, we are engaging a panel that will review your applications and score it accordingly. I will review what those scoring categories are and how things are scored and how that ties directly into the application right after this. But in September, once all the applications have been reviewed, the panel will come together for a public meeting virtually on Zoom to go through applications. From there, they'll make their funding recommendations and we'll solidify all of that, hopefully by the end of September, so that we can begin this grant cycle on October 1st. Again, the grant period is going to last a year, so the project must be complete by September 30th, 2023. From then, you'll have 2 months to complete a final report, and that final report will be due on November 30th, 2023. I want to take some time to talk about what you'll be filling out in the application. And once I go through kind of these specific categories, I'm going to talk about how those directly relate to scoring. So first off, we want to get to know a little bit about who you are, what's your name, what's your contact information, how can we get a hold of you. So we'll have you fill out some general information. We'll ask you for a quick overview of your project. And those will be simple questions like, give us a 2-sentence overview of what you're hoping to accomplish. And then we'll go into some more in detail narrative questions that ask you about the timeline and to go a little bit deeper into what you'd like to achieve. We'll ask you for an artist statement. So if there are any themes that you tend to cover in your work, if you have a specific medium that you cover, we want to know about that. We'll ask you to bolster that artist statement with work samples and a resume. I'll talk specifically about what work samples we're looking for and what we're looking for in that. And your resume, of course, includes any self-taught or academic training you may have, any performances or exhibits that you've taken part in as well. And as I've stated a few times during this presentation, this grant is really about getting folks back on their feet during and hopefully soon post-COVID. So we will be asking you about how COVID has impacted or stalled your work or impeded any growth over the past 2 years. We'll also ask you how this project specifically will further your work as an artist and will further your growth as an artist. We also want to know how this will impact the community. I talked a little bit about before, these projects we anticipate will be coming in a variety of what stage they're in. So you might be in the research phase, you might be ready to present a performance or an exhibit to an audience. And we just kind of want to know how you are planning to engage them and how you're planning to impact the community around you. And last but not least, we will ask you for a project budget and documentation of expenses. We'll have a template that you can fill out. It should be pretty straightforward in guiding you to let us know what you're specifically planning to spend this funding on. And we'll ask for documentation of that as well. And if you are a visual learner, never fear. Later in this presentation, Karen is going to walk you through what that budget template looks like. And she'll also be walking you through the community force application itself, so you can see what all this looks like when you'll actually be filling it out during the process. Scoring areas. So all the things I just talked about fall into one of these three scoring categories. And I will talk through those now. The first category is artistic merits and artistic excellence. This means how you describe the quality of the artist's body of work and the quality of the proposed projects. So we'll be looking to score these three things through questions like, what is your project, how well you describe it, how clear the timeline is. We'll be asking for your resume and work samples. And we also have the option for you to include a letter of support from a mentor or people that you maybe frequently collaborate with as well. The second scoring category is potential impact, and this makes up about 50% of the scoring for this application. So this is really important to us. The impact not only on your career as an artist and your growth, but also the potential impact on an audience. And there are several questions that address impact, and I'll kind of highlight those right now. We'll ask a narrative question about how this will impact you and give you the chance to tell us about that. We also want to know how COVID has affected your growth and practice, to what degree your project will engage and impact the larger community. Again, various stages. We just kind of want to know where you're at. If the artist is part of an underserved community, if you are part of the LGBTQIA community, if you have a disability, or if you are Black, Indigenous, or person of color. We are also interested to see how you plan to reach underserved populations, like those whose opportunities to experience arts are limited by geography, ethnicity, economics, or disability. And to kind of piggyback on that specific point, whether the majority of your project takes place within a neighborhood of low or very low opportunity, as indicated by the Ohio USR Opportunity Index. And I know all that is pretty esoteric, like what does that mean? How do I find that out? We'll have all this information linked on our website. And when you're walking through the application itself, it gives you links on how to determine maybe whether your activities fall in these areas or not. So never fear. We are here to guide you every step of the way. And the third scoring area that the application covers is administrative capacity. So what this means is the ability to complete the project and manage funds effectively. And this will be asked through questions about the quality of your budget. Is it clear? Is it feasible? Does it fall within that October 1st to September 30th timeline? It will be a part of a narrative where we ask you how you're going to spend the funds and how you can support what you're talking about in the narrative through attachments. And just the thoroughness and feasibility and clarity regarding timeline and budget. And we do want to be transparent that we do have some priorities for this funding. We are specifically looking to fund individuals who identify as Black, Indigenous, or person of color, individual artists who identify as LGBTQIA+, individual artists with disabilities, and artists who are planning to undertake projects that take place in a geographically underserved area. If you do not fall in one of these categories, it doesn't mean that you're ineligible. It just means that these are where our funding priorities lie. work samples. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the attachments that we'll ask you for. Work samples are an opportunity for you to showcase your past work in action. So there will be narrative questions about what you've done in the past and what you're looking to do in the future. And this just bolsters that work that you're talking about. The files that the application will accept include Word docs, PDFs, Excel files, and JPEG images. And so I'll kind of talk about what that means for these three specific things. So images obviously will be JPEGs, can include snapshots of any programming that you've put on in the past. Video or audio that's equal to or less than 6 minutes. The application does not accept hyperlinks. So the way that you would submit this is through a Word doc or a PDF with the link. And I know sometimes videos can tend to be a little bit longer. So just make sure you indicate in those files what you're wanting panelists to watch. And while, you know, panelists are amazing, we do want to be mindful of their time. So please do make sure that you're indicating what you want them to watch, especially if it is part of a longer video. And then manuscripts for writers, anything that's less than or equal to 10 pages single-spaced or 20 pages double-spaced. And again, a Word doc or a PDF is great for that. And I do want to mention for any videos or any place you're sending panelists out to on the web, please make sure that they do not need to create an account to access that. Please make sure that it's not password protected. And please make sure that you leave it up for a little bit of time. So while your application work is done in August, the panelist is reviewing all through September. So we want to make sure that by the time they get to the work and are reviewing it, it hasn't been taken down. So just make sure it's accessible and that it's still there until the grant process is over. Okay, now I'm going to toss it over to Karen, who is going to delve into the budget items and how to fill that out. And she's also going to walk you through our grant platform on Community Force and show you what all the things I have been talking about look like in real time and when you're actually doing it.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So the budget for the budget spreadsheet for this program is going to be really important for your application. Because this is a grant program that is funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, we have to follow a lot of really strict federal guidelines about how the grant funds can be used. So we're going to ask you to provide us with some pretty detailed information about where the dollars are going to go. But that being said, we've tried to make it as easy as possible for you. So we are going to give you a budget template to use. And sometimes I know budgeting is a little bit outside of what we as artists do in our day-to-day. And so it can be a little intimidating when you get a spreadsheet and you see all of these empty cells that you have to fill in. So rest assured that the spreadsheet that we've created uses a lot of auto totaling and auto filling, which means that you are not actually filling out every single piece of this budget template. So what you're seeing on this first screen here is an overview page that is going to auto-complete based on information that you input into a second page. But before we get to that, just to do a kind of a quick rundown on the types of expenses that you can include in your project budget. As Hannah mentioned earlier, this program is really designed to support projects that are things like doing exhibitions, creating new artwork, giving presentations, conducting research. It's pretty broad in terms of the types of artistic projects that you can do. So we've given you some examples of expense categories that we think pretty much cover the types of costs that you're going to have for those types of projects. But to explain them in a little more detail, you are allowed to include the cost of your own time as an artist as part of your project budget. So we do not have a specific rate that we require you to use. Someone in the chat asked, about the types of artists who are eligible to apply for this. And we define the arts very broadly. So we're expecting and hoping to see applications from dancers, writers, filmmakers, actors, musicians, vocalists, really a broad variety of artists, and also artists at different stages of their careers. And so what that means is that you all might have very different typical rates that you require when you're performing or you're giving a presentation. So basically in your project budget, we'll ask you to define what that rate is and give us an estimated number of hours that you think you're going to put towards the project that will be covered by the grant funds. Then professional services. So you might be undertaking a project that's going to be executed by you alone, but it's very likely that you could require some help from other artists or other professionals. So this professional services expense category is referring to say other artists who you hire to help you with the project, or if you are a musician and you need to hire a sound engineer to help you record an album, you can include the cost of their services here. It could be other types of contract workers as well. So maybe you really need to get a marketing specialist to help you promote the project. Say you're doing something like a public performance and you need to make sure that the word gets out there, but maybe marketing isn't exactly your area, so you want to hire a professional to handle that part of it. That could be included in those professional services costs as well. There's also a fees category, and this is talking about fees associated with doing things like attending a training course or attending a workshop or a conference. So if your project is more focused on research, or gaining knowledge in your artistic field, you might have some registration fees and things like that associated with completing the project. Thanks, Hannah. Let's see, and this I'll show you. So this is, Hannah's kind of taking us into what that second tab of this budget spreadsheet looks like. So this is where you're actually filling out in detail what each of those expenses is going to be. And the spreadsheet is going to auto total all of them and carry the totals over to that first page that we saw. So it looks like a lot, but we've only given you this many boxes so that you have enough space if you actually have that many specific different expenses. But basically what you would do, so if we look at this fees category, for example, there's a column that's labeled description. So you would type something in there along the lines of registration fee to attend such and such conference. And then you're going to tell us how much of those costs are going to be covered by this grant, which is the Arts Renewal Grant. And it could be the whole amount. So if the registration cost is $250 and you're going to cover the whole thing with the grant, you would just put $250 right in that column. But if it's more than that and you're planning on paying for some of it out of pocket, you could tell us that in the next column. Or if you have another grant or another funding source that you're going to use, you can tell us that there. This grant program has no matching funds requirement. You are not required to pay costs out of pocket. You're not required to identify other funders to support the project costs. But we've given you those columns just in case you have a project that is going to cost more than the $5,000 maximum award. If the project's going to cost more than $5,000, we'll need to see how you're going to cover those additional costs. And so that's why we then give you that last column that you fill out, description of other funding sources. So again, only if you're actually using other funders do you need to fill that out. And then that last column just totals itself. So we can look at the next slide. So the next categories where you could have expenses would be materials and supplies. So this is pretty straightforward and it's going to depend on the type of art that you create, but it could be paper. If you're a writer, it could be printer ink. It could be film. It could be paints, canvases. It's a pretty broad category. One thing that we do want to note, though, is that the materials and supplies have to be specific to this project. They can't be things that you're just using kind of in your daily activities. And we also are not referring to things like equipment for long-term use in that category. So say you are a photographer, and it would be, helpful to have a new camera to implement this project, but something like a camera is a permanent piece of equipment that you're going to be using for all kinds of things. And so that would not be an allowable cost under this grant program. But we do have a category here, equipment and venue rental. So if it's something that it's a piece of equipment or it's a facility and you just need to rent it for short-term use just for this project, then those kinds of costs are allowable. So one note on the venue rental, this is mostly going to apply if you're doing something like a public presentation or a performance as part of your project, and you want to rent a rehearsal space or the actual performance venue itself. And it could also be if there's a studio space, a community studio space that you want to rent, you could include those costs. However, it is important to know that the costs for your home studio or the workspace at your home is not allowed, because again, that's a cost that that you have, regardless of whether you're doing the project or not. So it's not allowable under the NEA guidelines. And finally, health and safety supplies are allowable costs. So again, if you're doing a public event and you want to be mindful of the latest COVID protocols, say you want to purchase masks, hand sanitizer, things along those lines for the people who are going to be implementing the event and then also attending the event, you can certainly include those kinds of costs in your budget and use grant funds to cover them. And then lastly, marketing and promotion. So again, if you want to get the word out about your project, say you want to do some paid ads through social media, or you want to do printed flyers, whatever makes the most sense for your project, you can include those types of costs in your budget as well. And I think that's the last of the budget categories. Woohoo! But of course, there is more. These are all spelled out in the program guidelines that are going to be posted on the website by the end of this week or early next. So you will have all of this to refer to. I would just restate that the project budget, it is really important, and we do ask that you use this template because that makes it easy for us and for the grant panelists to have consistency when we're doing the reviews, and we can make sure that your costs are allowable. We don't want to see anybody eliminated from consideration because of a lack of a clear project budget. So if you have any questions or you need guidance in completing your project budget, Hannah and I are going to be here to help you. So please don't be shy about reaching out to us.
Yes, and I will just reiterate that when you are filling this template out, please note that the first tab is locked, so you will not be able to edit it. So you'll want to make sure that you're in the expense breakout, that second tab there, and you'll be able to input information, no problem, and then re-upload it when you're completing the application. And we'll move right along into the application walkthrough. And Karen is much more technically savvy than I am, so she's going to take this as well.
I don't think that's true. I've just had so many years now with this platform. So let me go into my browser. All right. So first things first, you might already know this. If you found today's webinar, maybe you came through the website, so you already know where to go. But just for anyone who hasn't been there yet, all of the information about this program, including the link to the application when it launches on July 1st, is going to be available at the CultureWorks website, which is cultureworks.org. And you will head to apply for funding. And then the Dayton Region Arts Renewal Grant right now is the #1 program. It's right at the top of the page, but you can also, if you're on a desktop computer, you can also use this Arts Renewal Grant little shortcut key to take you there. So what you're going to see right now is just the general description of the program and the links to these info sessions. But again, within the next few days, you'll also see links to the program guidelines documents. And then on July 1st, down here in this gray bar, there's going to be a big orange button that says apply now. And so that will be the link to take you to the application. Once that application is live, that button will take you to this page. This is the grant platform that Hannah mentioned, which is called Community Force. And this is what the homepage of it looks like. So you can see the two grant programs, one for organizations and the one we're talking about today for individual artists, are listed here. Starting on July 1st, once we're accepting applications, you'll see an apply button right here. I don't remember what color it is, but should stand out pretty well. But for now, I'll show you what happens when you start the application process. You'll click the apply button. I'm going to click the login button because I'm fancy and I already have a login. So it'll take you to a page where you can type in your existing username and password. For anyone on the call who has applied to the Artist Opportunity Grant Program, which is funded by the Montgomery County Arts and Cultural District, you have likely used this grant platform before, so you might already have a username that you can use and it'll get you into the same place. But if it's your first time using Community Force, you'll need to go over here to create a new account. And it's just going to ask you to fill in some very basic information to set up that user account. So, whoops. Once you have your account set up and you log in, it'll take you to, if you've already had an account in the past, you'll see a list of all of your past applications. If it's your first time logging in, it'll just take you straight to this application's dashboard, which is going to look like this. So you can see that right now there are two sections. There's a general information section, which is where we are asking you, as the name suggests, for some general information about yourself, like your name, your preferred pronouns, and your best contact information. And then of course, the artistic discipline in which you work. So you can see that we've got a nice selection here of different artistic fields. But if it's something that we did not include, you can just hit that other button and then tell us what it is. And then the meat of the application is going to be here under this project application section. So we've tried to, or Hannah has really done the heavy lifting on this program and has done an awesome job. But we've tried to keep the application as lean as possible while still getting the information that we need in order to fulfill our obligations to the National Endowment for the Arts. So we've organized it so that you're giving us just a brief overview of your project, what it's called, when it's going to happen, and the type of project that it is. And then the rest of the application narrative is going to be organized according to those three scoring areas that Hannah talked about earlier. So this will kind of help you as you're completing the application. You can be referring back to the full program guidelines and checking the list of the scoring criteria to see how the panelists are going to be evaluating these areas of the application. And just make sure that you're addressing all of the points so that you know you've got a really strong competitive application. So again, a project description. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your work as an artist through a brief artist statement. And then you'll have some of that supporting documentation that Hannah mentioned earlier. So an artist resume that shows your work as an artist, and then some work samples. Then the potential impact, as Hannah mentioned, this is about half of the total scoring. This is a really important area because we're trying to make sure that this program is impactful and that it's really having the effect that the NEA wants to see, which is getting artists and others in the creative industries back to work. So we're going to ask you questions about how the project is going to impact your career as an artist, how COVID, as Hannah mentioned, has impacted you over the past couple of years, and then how this project is relevant to the larger community. And something that I want to note here is that for projects that have some kind of a public event component, whether that's a performance or a reading or a presentation, For those kinds of projects, the public benefit can often be pretty clear. You're going to tell us about how the community is going to interact with the project. What themes or subject matter are they going to learn about? Those kinds of things. But we're also hoping to see projects that, as Hannah mentioned, are focused on the creation of artwork and conducting research and doing all of those important steps that go into art, where you might not yet be ready to share it with the public. So if your project falls into that category, the way to think about that potential impact for the community has more to do with the subject matter that you're dealing with. What kinds of topics are you exploring in your work that is relevant to the larger community when you eventually get to the place that you're going to be sharing it with them? And it can also be helpful to indicate somewhere in that narrative, if you do have plans to share the work that just are going to happen after the project timeline is over for this grant. Panelists do like to see that. So you can say, that you're focusing on completing the work during this time frame, but once it is completed, you plan to share it through a public exhibition or something along those lines. And then, of course, administrative capacity, and this is where we get into the fund budget template that we just looked at, and providing a detailed timeline of your project so that we can see exactly how it's going to happen. And we have some great examples from some of our other programs of awesome, effective timelines that artists have submitted. So we can follow up with you later and direct you to some of those resources to give you some pointers on how to do that. Once you have submitted all of the answers and the other documentation, you're just going to go all the way to the bottom here and hit save and return to dashboard. And once all of the sections of the application read at 100%, I'll say there's going to be one more section here. It'll be a memorandum of understanding where we have to ask you to read some longer national policies that the NEA requires. Mostly they have to do with making sure that your project is not discriminatory, making sure that if you're doing some kind of a public event that it is accessible and ADA compliant, and also that if you're doing any kind of a public art piece, that you are not, say, putting a mural on a historic building where it's going to hurt the historic integrity of that building. There's a lot of language in there. We will ask you to read it just to make sure that you know what you're signing on for, but that section will be there shortly. So once you have completed all of those, the last step is to hit this final review and submit. And it's going to give you a little pop-up giving you some instructions. And you just say continue with review. And then it's going to show you exactly what your application will look like to the grant panelists. So you can take one more look at it, go through, make sure that everything looks how you want it to look. You can double check all of your attachments. I threw a bunch of nonsense in here, so just ignore my testing. But yep, just double check and make sure that you're happy with it. And then if it looks good to you, there's a checkbox at the very top and also at the very bottom of the screen where you can click to confirm that you have reviewed your application, you're happy with it, and then you will hit the submit button and that will send it in. I think that's everything that I was going to cover, so I will stop and hand it back to you, Hannah.
Thanks so much. I'll bring this PowerPoint back up. So this concludes the presentation portion of the information session. Again, this is being recorded, so you'll have access to this through the website if you wish to refer to anything that we've talked about today. Again, we'll also have eligibility guidelines up and some other documentation up on the website in the next few days for you to peruse through. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to myself or Karen. Our contact information is here on this slide, and we would love to hear from you to help make sure you're feeling confident about your grant submission. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to go ahead and pop it in the chat or pop it in the Q&A section. I know that we had a few in here from earlier, so I'm just going to go ahead and bring those up and start addressing those if you have any other questions, you're formulating them. I am in the entertainment industry as a director and cinematographer. Would this be for me? That's our first question. I would say it can definitely be for you. I would focus on a specific project. I think the word project here is really important to consider, and that can mean it's in the research and development phase. It can mean it's in the presentation or performance phase. Just as long as there's something specific that this funding is going toward, you're more than welcome to apply. And
One thing
Karen,
I would,
yeah, feel free to jump in
yeah, I
anytime.
would add there is that there is a rule from the NEA that the grants can't fund any kind of commercial activities. So if you are working through a production company, your production company can't apply for the funding. You would have to be applying as an independent filmmaker who's doing a project. I did want to mention, related to that though, that a common question that we get from individual artists, that's a really good one, is who owns the rights to the works that you create through the grant program? And the answer is you do, always, always, always. So when we say that the NEA funds can't fund commercial activities, that would be for a filmmaker, for example, if you ever do commercial work, so you're working with clients who are paying you for I can't, now my mind has gone blank, but advertisements and things like that, those types of activities wouldn't be allowed. But again, if you're doing an independent film project or something like that, that would be okay. For any other artists, just know that the grant funds cannot be used to cover costs associated with selling your work under those guidelines, but that doesn't mean that you can't sell the work. So any work that you create with these grant funds during that grant timeline, all those works belong to you. You own all of the rights, and you can certainly sell the works later on. You just can't use the grant funds to help you with that. So you can't use the grant funds to set up, an online website where you're selling the works and things like that, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Karen. We have another question in here from earlier in the presentation. You may have touched on this a little bit. In terms of exhibiting, would I be allowed to use this grant to help with my arts projects as well as applying to shows in the Dayton area within that year? What would happen if none of my artwork gets into those exhibits? Would I have to show proof I entered those projects? I would say yes, as long as you are creating those artworks within that October 1st to September 30th timeline. We're not funding anything that has already been finished. I would say it could cover the creation of the artworks that fall within that grant cycle. If there are any fees associated with submitting to those exhibitions, those could be funded as well. Karen, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
No, I think that's dead on. You can definitely include, yep, just like Hannah said, if you're creating a work and you want to submit it for exhibition or submit it to contests or anything like that, you can include the cost of those fees in your project budget. And to the question about would I have to show proof that I entered those projects? Yes. And that's a great question because your budget spreadsheet is only part of the story. That's what you're giving us so that we can, check and make sure that all the expenses are in the right categories and they're eligible. But you will also be asked to submit supporting documentation showing those expenses. And if you're awarded funding, there is a final report that you fill out after the project is completed, and we will ask you to submit receipts, things like that to show that you spent the grant dollars according to that project budget. So that's a great example. If you have just even an email receipt from the wherever you submitted the work, you should hold on to that through the grant period so you can submit it with your final report at the end.
Yes, I would also add that specificity is always your friend in an application like this. So if you have certain galleries or places that you are planning to submit to, you should let us know. And, you know, screenshots and things like that, always welcome. Looks like we have another question in here. Will we be able to log in and fill out the application over time, or does it need to happen all in one sitting? You are definitely able to fill the application in over time. There should be a button at the end of the application, at the bottom of the application page, and the bottom of the questions that says save. So you should be able to save it and come back in and edit questions and answers as needed. That way you don't feel pressured to finish it all at once. Here we go. These questions are rolling in now. With you specifying the funding priority categories, is it worthwhile to apply if you're not part of one of those priority groups? How much of the grant funds will go out to those not fitting in your priority categories? We don't have a specific amount of dollars set aside to those priority categories. And I would say it is worthwhile to apply if you're not a part of those. We just want to make sure that this is an equitable process and that we are prioritizing underfunded and underserved communities. And so that's why that's our funding priority. It doesn't mean that you're disqualified from applying.
Absolutely. And the way that that works on our end, like Hannah said, we don't know yet what the applicant pool is going to look like. So we don't have any kind of a specific breakdown of you know, how the funding is going to go out exactly. But in terms of how we prioritize those groups that we identified, in the scoring itself, the panelists have an established scoring rubric that they use. There are criteria tied to each question that you answer in the application narrative. And if you respond that you are a member of an underserved group, then there is additional weight added to your score for that scoring criteria. So it's basically built into the point system is how that works. So yes, absolutely apply.
Thanks for all these great questions, everyone. We've got another one here. Can projects or exhibitions outside of the Dayton area be applicable to the grant application? And the answer to that is no. Any activities that you're using this funding for must fall within the 30-mile radius of our offices. So anything in Cincinnati or Columbus or Louisville, sadly, is not going to be eligible.
And that restriction is because the NEA has a hard line about not allowing grant funds to be used for travel. So just to make sure that we are honoring that rule, we have restricted the project to have to happen within the Dayton region. That being said, if you are a Montgomery County artist and you're interested in doing a project that has a travel component, we would love to have you check out the Artist Opportunity Grant Program through CultureWorks administers it, but it's funded by the Montgomery County Arts and Cultural District. I happen to know that the person who asked that question is already well aware of it, but I'm sharing this with the others on the call. So that program is for professional development for artists, and you are allowed to include travel costs in your project budget. So if that's something you're interested in, check it out. That application usually launches a little bit later in the summer, typically at the beginning of August. So we should have some information about the next cycle out soon.
Thanks, Karen. I'm hopping over into the chat and I'm seeing a question about fund distribution. Are the funds made available in their entirety by October 1st? Karen, do you want to talk about how we're going to distribute those funds?
Yes, this is such a good question. So the timeline for the grant application, we are on a pretty fast, we're aiming for a pretty fast turnaround. So those panel meetings are going to happen again in mid-September, where they will make their funding determinations. And then we're going to reach out to each artist who has been selected for funding and ask you to complete a grant agreement and have a short virtual meeting with us just to go through it so that you understand what all of the expectations are and the rules about how to use the grant funds. And the deadline for grantees to submit that grant agreement is going to be September 30th. We have to submit a request for payment to the National Endowment for the Arts, and we can only do that once we have the grantees confirmed. So what that means is that there's likely going to be at least a couple of weeks after those grant agreements are submitted before we can get the funds from the NEA to then get out to the grantees. So that's something we are highlighting in the program's guideline document, that you'll want to be mindful if you have a project that has a start date right at the beginning of October during that allowable timeline. It might be a few weeks before you actually have the grant dollars in hand. So just be mindful of that as you're putting your timeline together. That said, for individual artists, we will be distributing the full grant amount in one lump sum.
Thanks, Karen. I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, just kidding. We just had one come in. And Karen, if I'm missing any, please let me know. I'm trying to field them as they come in. With the budget, how do I know what I should pay myself as an artist? Oh, that's such a good question. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to give you a specific, cut and dry number on that one. Especially because we are opening this funding to artists in many different disciplines. The standard rates are going to vary from discipline to discipline. It's going to vary based on whether you want to pay yourself hourly for your work or whether you want to give yourself or anyone that you're contracting a stipend. So I don't have a specific number to give you, Karen.
Yeah, I would say though, depending on what artistic discipline you're in, there are some great organizations in the community that you should definitely reach out to, who I think would be willing to give some guidance there. So if you're a visual artist, we have a really fantastic resource in the Contemporary Dayton, in downtown Dayton. They do a ton of work with visual artists. And so they might have some resources where they could direct you to some workshops or information about, how to properly value your work as an artist in the visual arts field. For filmmakers, there's an organization called Film Dayton that you can reach out to that might have some information about that. There's some great Facebook groups. There's the Art for Dayton, this is Dayton specific, but Art and Artists of 937 is a good one. There's Artists United Dayton, which isn't just focused on downtown. I think that they look at the larger region. And those Facebook groups are mostly filled with practicing artists in different fields. And so it's always possible, you could throw the question out and kind of get a, what do you call that? Can't think of it, but get a get a response from people who are actually working in the field about how they typically calculate that.
These are all great questions. We do have time for just a couple more. So this is another great question about individual artists versus some artist ensembles. What about an artistic ensemble? Do all artists apply separately for same project? And Karen, I'll definitely have you weigh on this as well, but my instinct would be no. Have someone who's designated as the lead of your project apply. And then if multiple artists are going to be getting paid for this, to just make sure that you include that in the fees as part of like a contract or stipend.
That is exactly what I would say. Yep.
Popping over back into the chat. How often can one submit an application after initial grant selections? For instance, as a filmmaker, we have scheduled shorts yearly. I'm not quite sure that I understand this question. This is going to be the only application that we have open for this NEA grant. And I would say, I'm hoping that I'm answering this correctly. This is unrelated to any of our other grant applications, so there shouldn't be any limit to if you will apply for this and you want to apply for another grant that CultureWorks offers.
Yep. And I would say too, this is a, oh, gotcha. So yes, so how often will the grants be offered? So this is a one-time opportunity that we have. The National Endowment for the Arts manages this American Rescue Plan subgranting program, and it was specifically created with federal dollars that are designed to help the arts and cultural industry recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a one-time thing. They distributed a grant to CultureWorks in the amount of $500,000. And so $350,000 of that is going to the organizational grant that we talked about on Tuesday, and then $100,000 is allocated to this grant program. So it is a one-time thing.
Can you use part of the grant money to purchase equipment needed to complete your project? This is a little bit of a hairy area. Karen was talking a little bit about it when she was going over the budget. Karen, I'm gonna let you take this one.
Yeah, it kind of depends on how you're defining equipment. For one of our other grant programs, we sort of use the guideline that if the equipment costs more than $500, it's probably something that is a long-term investment that you're making that really isn't specific to one project. It's for, you know, your work in general. So that type of equipment would not be allowable under the guidelines for this program. If you happen to mean, when you say equipment, you're talking about like a phone stand, if you're doing a recording or something and you need something to hold your iPhone and it costs $40, that kind of thing, I would maybe consider that more of a supply. So you could include those kind of small purchases. But we can definitely, if you have specific examples and you want to reach out to us after the webinar, we can definitely kind of vet those and give you some more guidance.
Yes, please feel free to reach out. I think that $500 cutoff is good, because I think at that point it's technically considered an asset. Well, we'll be sticking around for a couple more minutes in case any other questions pop up. Otherwise, I just want to extend my gratitude to all of you for attending today, for asking such great questions. And I'm sure as you marinate on all the information that you've heard and when you're looking through the documents on the website, more questions will arise. Please feel free to reach out to us. We are very excited about this opportunity, and we hope that you are excited about this opportunity as well. And we want you to feel confident and supported. So again, we'll be sticking around. And if you have any questions at all, you can pop them into the chat or feel free to email us later on. And thank you so much.